This is Delve Curiously, a moment of inquiry. Today we're focusing on someone who's determined to make the stories of others their life work. Dr. Thomas Allen Porter is a professor at the University of Texas at San Antonio. He believes that connecting with people and capturing their stories and sharing it with others is transformative. It can change people's lives. He's seen it in front of him in his classroom, where he motivates students to consider their purpose before they go out into the world, consider why they're in college, why they're doing what they're doing, and do that by examining their life story, with a focus on the characters who helped shape who they are today. Dr. Porter's story is also very interesting itself. It's a story of failure and of redemption, and of connecting with that one person who helps change your life by offering an opportunity, by opening a door. In the 70s, Dr. Porter was a high school dropout who left home and hitchhiked across the country. Just several months ago, he completed his PhD. A part of his dissertation was a focus on stories, the stories that we all carry, stories of support and encouragement and motivation, the kind of stories that connect us to other people.
Well, to me, we all have a sort of a hidden alliance of people who get us through several things. And at the time that I was 20 years old, I was labeled a dropout because I had dropped out of high school. And I got tired of working on floors on my knees and decided I wanted to get a college degree. And I was encouraged to find a GED program that would let me get the GED and get into college. That program happened to be headed by a man named Chewy, who was a migrant worker. This program was one where sons and daughters of migrant workers could get their GEDs.
Dr. Porter left his home when he was about 15 or 16. He dropped out of high school and hitchhiked to California. He left because he got into a pretty big dispute with his family. In his words, he turned his mom onto pot, his dad found his stash, and kicked his ass. There's a lot more to it than that, and I'll let Dr. Porter tell his story. But I want to focus on the transformation he went through, the place he was at in life 5 years after he left. Confronting the consequences of his decisions, he was going through a bit of an identity crisis. He felt that being labeled and identifying as a dropout would not allow him to find or fulfill his purpose in life. So when he was accepted and then graduated from the GED program, he saw himself as something more. He identified as something more than just a high school dropout. And he owed that all to Chewy Lopez, the director of the program who motivated him to find his purpose and served as a mentor in his life. This inspired him to continue his education. He eventually received his bachelor's and then his master's degree. After he left Houston, he lost touch with Chewy, but was still moved by his positive impact. And for nearly 14 years, he had been teaching in his classroom what he learned in that program. That we all have this hidden alliance of blessers in our lives. People who have motivated us to do great things, to pursue our purpose in life, and that one day we'll become a blesser for somebody else. See, even though he lost touch with Chewy, what he did for him still remained a huge part of his life. But little did Dr. Porter know, Chewy was not that far away. As Chewy got older, he moved back to San Antonio. Chewy is a veteran and was stationed in San Antonio for a bit before he moved to Houston. After moving back, he recalls that he would often walk around his neighborhood and eventually befriended a man who lived down the street. He and this man connected because he was also a veteran. They would share experiences and swap stories about being in the military. What he didn't know was that this was Dr. Porter's father, and Dr. Porter had no idea that this was Chewy. But he remembers the day that they both found out just who they were to each other.
Well, I was on the front porch of my house, and this fellow walked up the street. He used to walk in the neighborhood. We had an acquaintance with him, and he was asking about my father who had died, and I told him he had passed, and he mentioned to me that at some point when he was visiting my father, I had told him that that I had gotten a GED in Houston in a migrant worker program. And when he came up to me in my yard, he asked me what was the program that I graduated from all those years ago, 40 years ago. And I told him it was a program for migrant workers to get their GED. It was at the University of Houston, and its director was named Chewy. And he thought about that, and he said, what year was this? I said 1976. So it was, it caused him to think about where he was in 1976, and it turned out he, in fact, was the director of the HEP, the High School Equivalency Program at the University of Houston 40 years ago, who actually was the one who let me into this program. What was remarkable was not only that I had run into this individual who opened a door for me 40 years ago, but that this was the spring of 2016, and I was about to earn my PhD, and we had been talking in my classes about this man named Chewy, who years ago opened a door for me to begin my education with the GED. I had lost touch with him for 40 years. And what I told him was, do you know that for the 13 or 14 years that I've been speaking to my college students, I always mention this person who I lost touch with named Chewy. I just didn't know that that the guy lived in San Antonio now, and he was only one street away from where we lived. He's still actually one street away from where I currently live. He's my neighbor.
Their connection is really remarkable. And as I learned all this, I asked Dr. Porter if his father had any idea who he was.
No. My father passed in 2004, and he never knew that this man who he had been talking to in our neighborhood about his World War II experience had any effect on my life. My father was completely unaware that I knew this. I was completely unaware that this was the Chewy that I had met that had helped me with my GED 40 years ago. It was crazy.
Dr. Porter believes that none of this is a coincidence, that everything happens for a reason. And he takes this to heart in the way that he approaches teaching, the way he approaches meeting people and learning about their stories. Because each person, each character in our story, plays a role in shaping who we become.
Well, sometimes we don't know what our potential is, and at other times we realize our potential, but we don't see a way to fulfill it. And I believe we all have in our lives someone who's hidden, someone that others can't always see, who comes forward and, like Chewy, sees our potential and encourages us on our way. And this is something that I found interesting to study as a doctoral student, is who are those people? Who are the characters in our own story that when we're determined to fulfill our destiny and something blocks our way, they are there to encourage us to go through new thresholds and to experience new opportunities. Chewy was that person for me. And that is one reason why I came up with this idea of blessers. And my particular blesser was Chewy. And I began referring to my blesser as Chewy. And my students, and by the way, many of the students are from the Rio Grande Valley, they began to identify with the idea of Chewy's, which, by the way, is Jesus in Espanol, Jesus. And they began to identify their Chewy's in their lives. In fact, the first class, when I invited Chewy to come speak to my class, my college class, one of the women was due. She was pregnant, and her baby was due in a couple of months. And she told the two of us, "This is my Chewy." It was a little girl that was going to be born. This is my Chewy, because my little girl inspired me to become a college student. That's what these Chewy's do. That's what our blessers do. And these are the mentors in our own hero's journey.
Dr. Porter brought Chewy to his classroom because he wanted to share his story with his students. He wanted them to hear the importance of having a mentor and the impact it can leave on your life. He instructs students who are becoming teachers themselves. They are going to become the Chewy's in the classroom and Chewy in life. They will be that person that the students are turning to. He recalls in his story just how important this was to have, especially at a time when he couldn't talk to his family and he wasn't talking to his father.
And I couldn't speak to him. And I couldn't speak to my mother either. I wasn't talking to my family. So by the time I had moved to Houston and worked in a cleaners and then on the floor, installing floor, and then I met Chewy. Chewy was somebody I could talk to. Chewy knew young people. He knew young people got in trouble. They became misdirected. They just needed a path, and Chewy knew how to sort of like what I do with my students. You sort of see what their potential is, and you listen to them, to their stories, and you can hear the direction or the possible directions that they want to take, and you encourage them in that way. That is how Chewy and I are alike. And I've heard other educators that do this also. They do a lot of intense listening to hear what is that goal direction that you want to take. And when you can help someone in the direction that they want to take, or you can help awaken them to their potential of the many things they possibly could do, they think of you as this person has performed some kind of miracle, but really you didn't. You just listened.